Welcome to Animation for All. My name is Nathan Adams. I am your host. This program is presented to you by Shampoo Studio.
Hello everyone. Welcome to episode 3 of our series in doing jack-o'-lanterns. So the first 2 episodes we did the pumpkin and then we carved the jack-o'-lantern. Now we get to make it animated. This is why we do Animation for All series. So, to begin, we have our jack-o'-lantern object. We're in Blender 2.63 and we want to make something so that we can have this animatable. First thing we'll do, Shift A, Armature, Single Bone. Now, to make this bone visible, I'm going to go right over to this little skeleton icon here, and I'm going to check X-ray. Now we can see it in all views, regardless of where it is in relation to the pumpkin. We're going to take this object, the pumpkin, and we're going to shift, right click on the bone, Control P, and I want to do this set parent to bone. Now with this bone, when we select it in object mode, the pumpkin will go anywhere that bone goes. And in addition, if we do Control Tab on the bone, we are in the pose mode. So we go from object mode to pose mode. And once again, we press G. That'll help us so we can move the bone. And as you can see, the object moves right along with it. Now, what we're going to do next is we're going to add some bones. So it's not just this bone controlling this pumpkin object, but we also have some other bones that'll be locally moving certain parts of this jack-o'-lantern object. So if we tab, then you see we are in our edit mode right here. We're going to add a few bones. So let's Shift D, and I'll just put Z so it's constrained to the Z axis. And we'll move that forward. And we'll also move it this way. Now what I want to do is I want to line it up right here with the bottom of this eye. And at the same time, I want to line it up in this direction. So it's more or less right there in the bottom center of the eye. So a little bit more. And then I'm actually going to take this part of it, the tail, move it down, move it back a little bit, so that when we move this bone, when we're in our pose mode, go back to tab, then we're back in our pose mode. If we take it on normal, this is the direction that our bone will be moving. Instead of going straight up and down, it'll be at a slight slant because it's how it's going to be moving in relation to the actual jack-o'-lantern. Now let's tab back into edit mode. Shift D, X. Do the same thing here. Okay, and let's take a look at how it is in relation to the front back. Looks pretty good. And now, I'm going to take these 2 bones, we'll duplicate them, Shift D, Z, we'll put them up where the brow location would be. Move them back. Oh yeah, so I'm going to go back into global right here. Alright, I'll take these tips, move them back. Move them down a little bit. There we go. I'm actually going to do the same thing for these 2. Move them down. Move them forward. There we go. A to deselect all of them. Let's see. And then I'm I'm going to take one and put it at the upper lip. Pull that back. You get the tail end here. And we're going to move this over to the center of the mouth. And Shift D, Z. Move it back. And Shift D, X. Shift D, X. Okay. Just a couple more. Shift D, Z. Then I'll explain what these are going to be doing in a moment. Move this down a little bit. And then I'm going to tab out of edit mode. And then I'm going to tab, and then I'm going to select the pumpkin object, tab into edit mode here. And then I'm going to press L to get all these vertices that are linked together. And then I'm going to move the cursor to the center of this object by pressing Shift S, cursor to selected. I'll tab back out, select the armature, tab back into edit mode there. And then Shift A. Let's move this so that we have our object lined up with the end of the stem there. And now we have all our deformed bones and also our base in place. So we just need to do a little bit of housekeeping here. And by that I'm talking we're going to take all these bones and the armature object itself and rename them. I'm going to name this JOL underscore skeleton. I'll do that for the armature and for the object itself. So I did Control C while hovering over it, and then I just Control V. So now we have the name of this object as JOL underscore skeleton. And now you'll see this little bone icon. And so what we do now is we're going to rename each of these bones. This one I want to have as the base, so I'll do CTRL underscore base. So I'm using the CTRL as bones that will be controlling but not deforming. So that's my meaningful naming system. You may have your own. I encourage you to use whatever is meaningful to you. And now we'll do the same thing for each of these bones. And in fact, before I do that, let's go back to the base one. And I want to turn off deform on this one. The rest of these I'm going to have as deformed bones. So I'm going to give them the prefixes of DEF. As I'm looking at this, I think I ought to take a couple of these objects back. So if I tab back into edit mode, and just fix those. Okay. There, that's fixed. Alright, now, actually I'll start out with this bone here. We'll go from the top and we'll work our way down. This one we'll call DEF for deform underscore lid. This one I'm going to be calling DEF underscore squash. So we have control base right there. Okay. And then we have def underscore brow. And I'm actually going to make this dot r. This designates it as a brow that's on the right side. And we have def underscore brow dot l. We're going to use this system throughout when there's going to be any mirroring of any of these bones, so that when we go into actually animate, we're going to be able to flip these poses. Alright, this one we'll call def underscore I dot r. In fact, I'll control C that. Oh. Control V. And then I'm going to flip names. Def I dot L. Okay. And I'll do def underscore cheek dot R. Control C while hovering over that. And then Control V. Once again, flip names. Real quick and easy way to rename your bones without going through a whole lot of hassle. This one, since we just have one, we don't have a mirrored of it. def underscore ulip, ulip for upper lip. And then Control C, Control V. I'll call this def L lip for lower lip. And there we have our deform bones. But now they're all in their places, but let's say if we move this, well, this moves around, but these bones right here, they'll stay in their places. So we want all these bones to be parented to this base object. However, before I do that, I want this bone to be parented to this bone, so that whenever this one moves right alongside it. So if we tab into our edit mode, Control P, we're going to keep offset. We're not going to connect any of these bones. We'll just keep the offsets. And now we can select this, all the bones except for the base, which we'll save for the last. And then Control P, keep offset. And then all those other bones are now parented to this bone. So now, when we move this one, they all move with it. So, join me in my next segment, as now we're going to use these bones to deform this object. Alright, now that we have our deform bones set up, what we can do next is that we can take these objects. You'll notice if we just move them right now, we're in pose mode, nothing happens with this with the pumpkin object. So our next thing that we have to do is that we need to, well, basically we're going to be constraining this pumpkin with these bones. So if we select the pumpkin and then we shift select our armature object, Control P, we want to do this with automatic weights. Enter. And now what that does is that gives us a new modifier on this pumpkin object, where now we have an armature modifier. So we have solidify and armature. But I actually want to have the armature above, so when working with vertex groups, that we don't have to worry about any extra geometry that we really don't care about at the moment. So if we now move this around, you'll see we have the def lid. Let's grab that. Pretty cool, right? So more or less we got something awesome, something we can work with here. So now I have a few things. I think it's looking pretty good as far as the movements go. But there are a few things that I do want to actually clean up. Okay. Let these go with what they have. I'm pretty satisfied with that. Yeah, I like that. But it's just here at the top. Okay, the squash, it's alright, but it's this lid here. What I'd like this bone to do is get the lid to move entirely independently. But right now it's not happening because it's actually stretching part of the shell pumpkin here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go into our edit mode with the pumpkin, tab here, and we're going to go into our object data, and you'll notice here that we have in the vertex groups all of these vertex groups that are named after the bones. So now if we take this def lid named after this bone here, all these vertices correspond to this def lid. We want it set up so that this lid is going to be affected by this bone. So if we were to say select, well, there's a lot more vertices selected than what we want. So what we can do is let's get A to deselect everything, and we're going to press L so that only these vertices in the shell are selected, and we're going to say remove from the def lid vertex group. And now if we go back into our bones, back into the pose mode, if we press G, now we have it so it moves where it needs to go. Likewise, I do not want the lid object to be affected by this squash bone. So let's tab back into edit mode, and we're going to go to def squash. So we select that, look at all those vertices that are assigned to it. Let's deselect. Now we'll press L again for these two groups of vertices, and we're going to remove. Now let's try this again. And now the lid is no longer being affected by this particular squash bone. So now the squash should be only affecting mainly the vertices at the top of the shell. There we go. But there's still a little bit of cleaning up that we need to do on the top of this pumpkin shell. Because if you notice, the way it's moving, the lid's moving where it's supposed to, but those vertices on the top of the shell, not quite as much as what we'd like. So now what we do is we tab back into our edit mode, and we're going to do Control Tab, Face, get A to deselect everything, and then Alt, get these faces. We'll tab out of edit mode, Control Tab. And now we see that we have this squash bone selected. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to get it so that the vertices in the weight paint mode, I didn't explain that quite yet. The weight paint mode, what it does is that it assigns the vertex weights to these vertex groups, or the ones that are affected by the bones. So right now, the simple explanation is that blue, when it shows up, it means that it's not assigned at all whatsoever. It does not get affected by it. And when it goes all the way up to red, that's where it's at a weight of 1. So right now we have weight of 1 to assign to it, and I want to select only certain vertices. So I'm going to get this little icon here, and what it does is that all those vertices that I just selected in the edit mode are going to be the parts that are going to be affected by my weight painting. And now, if I go through, and I'm actually going to set this strength all the way up to 1, I select all these upper rim vertices. Another thing I would also suggest is turn on auto normalize. So that when you affect these vertices, that it also affects other vertex groups and you're not having conflicting weights that don't add up to what they're supposed to. But when we get it to a weight of 1, that means that these vertices will be entirely affected by that specific bone. If we did it 50% on one bone and then 50% on another, then it would be affected only halfway by one and then halfway by the other. So you get the idea. Anyway, so continue going through, and now we have all that rim of vertices selected. We have a weight of 1 now. And now let's Control Tab. And now we'll see how our vertices will be affected. So if we press G with the squash bone, it's looking a little better. There's a little part that's still kind of bugging me back here. The back. You'll see you get kind of like a little spike going. So we can actually go through and we can affect some more of these vertices. Control Tab. And we will just take the rest of these vertices. Oh yes, okay, Control Tab. Now let's take a look. Alright, I'm a little more pleased with that. I don't see me squashing it down to the point where you're going to have all these really nasty normals going on or anything, so what we can do is we can actually smooth these out. So just tab into edit mode, deselect everything, tab, Control Tab, and let's see, we'll go through and we'll actually do some blurring here. Alright. Alright, so turn off the face select mode there. And then Shift F. Actually, Shift F is not working in this particular thing, so we are going to take it to 0.4. Let's take a look at what it does when we do that. We'll blur that. Few more. I should be able to smooth out some of that creasing distortion that we have as we move our bones here. Control Tab. kind of having a little trouble there at the back. So we'll just blur this a little bit more. Let's see what we can do with that. Okay, just a little bit more. Control Tab. There we go. All right. Anyway, this gives you an idea of just what we do so that we get all of our bones to deform our mesh correctly. Press G. This one looks pretty good. I'm pretty happy with this one. G. So what we'll do is we'll stop here, and then we'll get into another segment where we actually start constraining these bones. And so I'll see you in the next segment. Alright, now we're going to constrain these bones so that they are only constricted to certain movements. Now, in order to get everything to show up when we bring up our bone, right now we can see that we have the translate channel, but we also want to be able to turn on the rotate. So what we do is we go down to these little items right here, we shift select to turn on the rotate gimbal and the scale. The scale I don't do much with, so I'm just showing you that so that you have it, so that you know like that it's there, right? But mostly I'm going to be focusing on the translate and the rotate. So translate, rotate. Okay. Alright, so if we press N to bring up our properties, you'll notice here we have our transforms. For location, we have all three axes activated on this. If we're to lock one, then you'll notice that now we no longer can move in that direction with the gimbal. So with these, I actually want to have all three of the axes active for this particular object. The scale, I'm actually going to lock. I really don't care about the scale part. And I'm going to change from global to normal. Alright. And that way we can move according to how the bones are oriented. So, there we go. We can actually have this pumpkin literally flipping its lid. Okay, let's turn scale off on each of these. This one, I'm not going to have the rotation turned on for it. You'll notice there are four axes, but basically what it is here is it's called the quaternion. Don't ask me a whole lot of what it means. All I know is that with the four rotations, it prevents something called gimbal lock. Again, I don't know what it is. If you can tell me what it is, I would really appreciate it. So I'm going to have this one just move in the three directions. Likewise with these ones, actually I want one at a time here. I want to turn off rotations, scales, and then I'm actually going to constrain one of the axes, or rather I'm going to turn off one of the axes for the location transform channel. And the one that I want to turn off is the blue one, or the local Z. Now I want to do the same thing for this bone. Okay. I'm going to do that the same with these bones right here. And in fact, with this bone, I also want to turn off the x-axis, so this one only goes up and down. Do the same for this. This one, turn off the scale, rotate. But I think I'm going to keep all three axes active for that. Same with this. Alright. And we'll do the same for these cheek ones. There we go. This one, the base bone, I'm going to do everything active. But as far as the constraints go with the axis of movement and rotation, the other bones I do want constrained. Gotta make sure that every one of them is constrained as I want them. Okay. Oops. There we go. Alright. I'm pretty satisfied with that. So now if we just grab this, rotate it, look at all that cool stuff that we've just done. Now if we want to put it back in its original location, we can do Alt-R, which clears the rotation, and Alt-G, which clears the location, puts it back in its original place. Press A to deselect. Do the same thing, Alt-G, Alt-R, and they go back to the same place that they were when we originally did the edit mode. So there we go, there's the constraint section of it. And our next section we're going to do shape keys. And I'll explain the shape keys a little bit in detail as to why we're going to be doing what's called the shape keys. Alright, now for our last portion. We're going to do a section called shape keys. And by shape keys, what I'm talking about is the mesh reshaping itself so that we can do a few things such as mouth shapes. So not all the shapes that are controlled for this mesh being animated are controlled by armatures. Some of them are taken from the mesh themselves, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. So as you can see, you have all this geometry, and we can actually move this around when we do shape keys. But actually I need to tab out of edit mode. I realized I done that prematurely. So we have the first one, basis. We want to keep this as it is, and then we're going to make some other ones. Key 1 we're going to call AI. The reason we're going to do this is that this is going to correspond with phonetic breakdowns that we're going to produce in another program in our next episode. So that's the first one. Next one is FV. Then we have E. I'm not putting these in a very particular order. As long as they correspond with the vowels and the consonants that come from this other program, that's what matters. So A, I, F, V, E, O, U, M, B, P, and then in lowercase we'll put etc for etc. Oops. Okay, etc. etc. Okay? So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 2 more now. Okay. The next one will be L. So one more after this. And the last one will be QW. There we go. Now we have 9 shape keys that we're going to deal with. Basis we're going to leave alone. Then we'll do AI. So these will have the formation of the mouth making the A or the I phonetic key sound shape. So what we'll do is we'll take the phrases that are going to be affected by this, and we'll do a little bit of scaling, moving here and there, and that should get us our shape. So we're going to just grab it by pressing G, going Z, S, X. We'll do the same thing for the bottom part here. S, X, G, Z. Actually, I'm going to turn O on for proportional editing. G, Z. We can increase the size of that soft selection radius. Alright. And now, if we play with our value, you'll notice it going back and forth here. Very nice. And now let's continue the same process for the other ones. And I'm actually going to pause it right here so that we can get a few more of these done, and then I'm going to show you what they look like after all has been said and done. Alright, I've defined each and every one of these shape keys, so now I'm going to show you what they look like. If we go and zoom into the mouth here, there we go. Start with AI. Just opens up a little bit wider. Okay. Now for FV, you'll notice they come together and they also go a little bit inward on the one bottom one. I didn't make these perfect as this is going to be basic, and I like to have a little bit of variation in this as well. We have E. Oh yes, FV needs to be taken back down to 0. E. O. U. M, B, and P. Etc. That one actually doesn't do anything. It just stays there. We have L and Q and W. Alright, and that's our shape keys. And that will do it for this episode. We've been rigging this pumpkin, and now we have our armatures that we can move with this thing. And so, there we go. This just gives you a little idea of what we can do with this now. So, stay tuned for our next episode when we take this rigged pumpkin jack-o'-lantern object and animate it. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.
Thank you for watching Animation for All. This has been a production from Shembol Studio. For more information, go to shembol.blogspot.com, and you can also follow us on Twitter.